Good afternoon, everyone. Our meeting of our ES committee acquired in their the elder required that we meet with the committee periodically. Bring items that we need to have some input on from external groups and organizations that help us manage our program. So I'm Rebecca Donaldson. I'm the ESCA Programs and Related State Initiatives Coordinator here at Utah State. And we'll start here with Leslie Evans, and if you'll each introduce yourself and what you represent, whether you're a USPE employee representing a specific area, and then we have our external stakeholders as well.
I'm Leslie Evans. I'm new to Dr. Donaldson's team in school improvement.
Jeff Ojeda, for Evento.
Could you explain what McKinney-Vento is?
Oh,
Some people may
sure.
not
So
know.
McKinney-Vento is basically services for homeless children in.
I'm Max Lang. I work here at the USBE with State School Turnaround and Title I School Improvement.
I'm Artie Ballot. I'm Nancy Ward, and I'm coordinator of federal programs, basically, in Georgia.
I'm Trina Valdez. I'm the State Education Liaison with Human Services. The Board of Education partially funds my position, but I am an employee of Human Services.
Thank you for being here.
Murray Maceras. My responsibility with regards to this committee is Title I Part D, which is neglect and delinquent. My other responsibilities include civil rights matters.
Leanne Wood, I'm the Education Commissioner for Utah PT.
Nancy Kennedy. I was a state officer in the Utah School Boards Association. Now I'm a board member in Boston.
Deborah Svensson. I'm the superintendent of health.
Christelle Estrada, Title III, which is refugee returners and immigrant services.
Cheryl, would you introduce yourself?
Oh, she's coming.
Cheryl?
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, and I'm Cheryl Ellsworth. I work here at the State Board of Education, and I'm the parent engagement specialist.
I'm Deirdre Straight. I'm CC chair at Highland High School.
Again, thank you all for being with us. I believe we have Danelle here. Lives in the Ogden area, and she's joining us online. Former Title III director. Everyone with lots of roles. You have a copy of the minutes of our June meeting in your packet. I'll give you a second to look those over. If anybody has any additional comments that you think need to be added, that we missed something. Other than that, those are there for your information. We sent those out following the meeting.
No, I'm just waving her down.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying you have to ask.
No, I will try to be silent in the meeting.
Thanks, Mary.
Yes. I'm Barbara Smith. I'm the director of a nonprofit called Utah Family Partnership Network, and our specialty was parent engagement in Title I schools. And I had the PERC grant for a number of years, Parent Information Resource Center grants from the U.S. Department of Ed. And then I served on the Davis School Board for 24 years, just retired from doing that.
Thank you, Barbara. Great. We're just barely getting started. We just did an introduction before. So just a quick review of the agenda. As we get started, I'm going to ask Matt Evans about the upcoming school identification for schools and improvement under the Every Student Succeeds Act. Specifically, how awarding grants of our school improvement funding out to the school board at their last meeting last week approved an amendment to the state's Every Student Succeeds Act plan, dealing specifically with the English learner indicator in the accountability. We'll talk about that. Then I will talk to you about our National Distinguished Schools and get your feedback on what we're hoping to do with that this year. Val Murdoch, who serves as our Title I monitoring specialist, is at a finance meeting over at the Public Safety Building. I'm going to talk to you about a combined monitoring protocol that we're going to pilot this year with 3 LEAs. And then Jeff Ojeda recently responded to a desktop monitoring review of the Utah Migrant Education Program, and he'll be just following up with you about how that is going and what the response was to the Department of Education. So I'll turn the time over now to Max and Leslie.
Our materials are on those pictures of the slides. I hope you don't need a microscope to read them. This will be sent out electronically after the meeting, but if you have questions, let me know. So I included a few key terms in that first slide as we're transitioning to ESSA. Terms like priority and focus schools are no longer used. Instead, we're using CSI and TSI, so comprehensive support and improvement. We'll talk about how schools are identified for that, and TSI being targeted support and improvement schools. Some short description there for your review if you'd like. But essentially, when we get to slide 3, hopefully that depicts that we will not double identify schools. That was an issue in the past with state turnaround and ESSA school improvement. So just a little visual there to show you that we have created a new handbook for schools to use that integrates those 2 programs and ensures that schools won't be both a state turnaround school and have that double jeopardy of also being a CSI school as well. So then in the next slide, you can see that the way state school turnaround schools are identified is that they're the lowest performing 3% of all schools, regardless of their Title I status, and they're taking the data for 2 consecutive years. In the past, it was just 1 year's data, and now it's 2 consecutive years. Or they could be identified as the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools over 3 years. Or any high school, regardless of Title I status, with 67% grad rate or lower for 3 school years on average. Yes, Quick question about that, actually. Lowest performing 5% of Title I schools averaged over 3 years. Over how many years are you looking at for the average then? Because I should have thought about this question before I asked it. But I'm just wondering how they wouldn't have gotten into state turnaround first. If it's 2 years for that, and then you're saying, like after 3 years, like is there like a certain number that we're looking at, like so that they would know that they were then turned into CSI? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so this 18-19 school year will be the first year that CSI schools are identified.
Okay, yeah.
So in December,
Right.
when that data comes out, we'll be identifying them. By that time, we will also be identifying cohort 3 of state school turnaround. So we've been working with Data and Statistic, Aaron Bruff's crew, and they've developed, it's somewhat of a complex filtering system. It first takes a look at all the schools in the state, identifying 3%, and then essentially what it does in a nutshell is weeds out the Title I schools so that if they're, and then there's a process of making sure that the schools are not double identified.
Okay.
So that we'll get the lowest 3% of all schools, yet we won't double identify for Title I. It goes
Okay.
through that filtering process.
Okay. Yeah,
It's-
that makes sense
It's
now.
it was a whole whiteboard of graphs and explanations.
Yeah.
It took about 2 hours, but it was.
It's Aaron's complex matrix.
Matrix,
We're
yeah.
gonna do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this,
This.
and then we're gonna know.
Okay, okay. That actually
We
makes sense.
have a
Thank you.
write-up too of models that they ran through to make sure.
Yeah. It
So,
will also pull out any schools that are special schools that serve special populations. So for example, Jordan has Carson Hamilton School, which serves their students with severe disabilities. Granite District has Hart Dixon School.
Oh, yeah.
So those schools will be filtered through, and then we'll say, well, this school serves a very specific population of students. They will be pulled out.
Okay.
Because otherwise, those schools would always be an improvement,
Yeah.
which would not be a fair situation.
Okay.
So Aaron has built in all kinds of filters and processes to ensure that the correct schools are identified for school improvement, and the resources go to the schools that really need it. So
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
it is
Thanks.
complex. But thanks for that question, Cheryl.
then you go to targeted support and improvement, and that those schools will be identified over 2 consecutive years, and it'll be looking at any student group that fall below the percentage of points associated with the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. Lowest 5% of schools in the state's accountability system, so all schools.
Yeah, and our data and statistics people have done some modeling on that with older data, and we know that primarily the 2 groups of students that are going to be identified will be English learners and students with disabilities.
And the N size will have to be greater than 10 for any of those
Yes.
student groups. That program is primarily led by the schools or LEAs themselves. It's not a funded category. Goes through many of the same steps of the comprehensive improvement cycle, but stopping at sending your plan to us and then we approve it or anything like that. So you really need a microscope for slide 7, but we can get you this information. Instead, it has some of the breakdowns of the timeline that I just reviewed, however. So, I mean, if you have questions, then I think we're going to my friend Max over there.
Okay, thanks, Leslie.
You're welcome.
As the English major, I'm going to talk about budgets and allocations. So this is right up my alley. So first I want to just set the context, and then I want to just kind of review a little bit about the last time we talked about the allocations to school improvement schools. We made a couple of decisions. I'll remind you of those decisions. And then I need a little bit of your help moving forward. We need some input, some feedback, some suggestions on exactly how we should consider moving forward with this. Just keeping in mind that this is kind of a unique year. The school accountability data isn't going to come out for those schools, so we won't identify CSI schools, TSI schools until December. So we're going to be moving pretty quickly over the next few weeks to come up with some of this stuff. So just to set the context, what the bill says in regards to school improvement schools is that we reserve 7% off the Title I allocation to the state. 95% of that will go out to the schools. However, Utah has not suffered through kind of the same economic difficulties that other states have had. So based on that, our overall Title I allocation has actually decreased. And back in DC, some decisions were made in regards to the ESSA that there would be a hold harmless for those schools who had received Title I funds in the past. So there's going to be a hold harmless element for those schools and those districts that received Title I funds in the past. As such, our initial allocation for school improvement would have been somewhere around $6 million. After the hold harmless, we won't be able to reserve 7%. We'll be able to reserve about half of that original allocation. So we've got about close to $3 million to work with for school improvement. Therefore, because we have limited funds, we need to be very careful and make sure those funds are focused on the schools where they have the greatest needs and they will have the greatest impact. So, moving forward, just to kind of remind you of the last time we met, we discussed that the bill allows for the allocation of school improvement funds to be done as a formula amount or a competitive amount or both. We actually put this to a vote, and what you decided was that we would do both. We would move forward having part of that be through a formula and part of that to be through competitive. In regards to the other decision that you made is that initially there would be a base allocation. We didn't decide how much that would be, but that there would be a base allocation moving forward, that the competitive amount should be based on a needs assessment and root cause analysis and strategies, evidence-based strategies that are directed towards those root causes that were identified. So before I go on to actually get your help, your suggestions, and please.
Not using the window. What's hold harmless mean?
Good question. This is my understanding. What that means is that Title I schools, or districts that received Title I funds and then allocated those funds out to Title I schools, they allocated a certain amount. The hold harmless says we can't allocate less than a certain percentage of that amount moving forward. So they got so much money in the past, they're going to get at least this percentage of that amount moving forward. And because we had an overall decrease in funds for the state, it impacts school improvement funds.
How much was that decrease about?
Overall for the state, it was, what, from 81 million down to...
Oh, overall Title I. Last year we had 87 million, a little more than 87 million. This year we have 81,300,000. So we had a $6 million cut overall. But then the whole harmless that Max is talking about also kicks in. So we are not able to reserve any school improvement funding from any LEA that did not have a certain amount of what their allocation was last year. So it really limited the amount of money you could set aside for school improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we got impacted quite a bit in Utah because of that, and not as much as some other states. There were some states that essentially now, after the hold harmless reservation, they have about $1 million to service all their schools for school improvement. So as unfortunate as we feel fortunate that at least we weren't as impacted as heavily as some other states. Okay, this is where I need your help. Again, just to clarify, the last time we met, we decided on those things, that we would first move forward in allocating school improvement funds, some on a formula amount with a base amount moving forward for all schools that are identified for CSI, and then another part later on based on a needs assessment and root cause analysis and a plan that utilizes evidence-based strategies. We would put the second part of that in a competitive allocation. So, at USBE, we've done some preliminary looks at other states and had some preliminary conversations looking for some good models that implement formula and competitive base. And we didn't really find anything that kind of fit in the model that we're looking forward. Their states are either generally going through a formula allocation or they're doing a competitive. We hadn't seen any that we really liked. Now we need to do a little bit more research in regards to that, but preliminarily we didn't see anything that really fit into that. So we had some discussions on our team and here in the office in regards to what we might want to consider first for the formula amount, and then second for the competitive amount. There's a slide in here that says LEA 1003 funds, formula plus competitive award. Because we have a limited number of funds, we want to start with that base amount and then move forward with a formula. In the past, generally, and I wish I could say in the past, all schools that were identified for CSI got the same amount. So moving forward, we thought where we have a limited number of funds, we need to be a little more careful through that formula. We want to make sure that those schools that are going to receive these funds, that they're going to make the biggest impact in those schools. So a couple of things that we considered for the formula. These are just general considerations. We haven't done any models or any projections on what these allocations will look like. We just have these conversations knowing that these items will probably impact these schools. The demographics, what the poverty total was there, the number of students, the number of teachers, any of the student groups. There's a large number of EL students in there, students with disabilities, and how that might impact. We want to take those things into consideration. Per pupil allocations. I can tell you that it seems like every district or every LEA seems to have a different amount of per pupil allocation, so we want to take that into consideration. The other thing that we talked about was the Title I allocation. Leslie and I spent some time looking at Title I schools previously, and there's quite a disparity among Title I schools on how much money they receive. One school we looked at, it was a Title I school, was receiving $600,000, and then to the other end of the spectrum, schools that were receiving just a couple of $1,000s. Well, those Title I funds are supposed to be there because the school is impacted and it affects the academic achievement of those students. So this was a piece we want to take into consideration. To that end, that's as much as the conversation as we've had. So for this group, moving forward, just in regards to the funding formula, are there other things that we should consider beyond those? Are there places we should look to find examples or templates or suggestions that you may have? Cheryl.
You know, when I was thinking about this, location kept coming into my mind. I really think there are resources in our more urban and suburban areas that rural areas just cannot get. They don't have companies that are donating. They don't have jobs. There's a lot of things that are lacking. And so for me, location would be a big piece to it.
Excellent. Great, thank you.
I would give it a 2x factor in that. Okay. Seriously.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, it becomes very different from the
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Is the Title I allocation of funding a formula fund? Is that why the discrepancy between some schools and another?
Yes, so we receive, at the state, we receive an allocation from, through Title I for the state. And then there's a formula that goes out to LEAs. So we allocate money based on number of indicators. And then each LEA, there are a couple of parameters in there for Title I. I can let Becky or somebody really involved with Title I funding explain this in a little more detail. But there are indicators and factors that LEAs have in order to allocate those funds out to schools. Essentially, it's a poverty percentage and their rank order. Is that pretty close?
Yeah, so there are wide, as Max was saying, some schools getting $600,000 a year in Title I, other schools may be getting a few $1,000s. But once we allocate funds out to the local education agencies based on the federal formula that we have to follow, the LEA then determines which schools they're going to serve. They have to rank order their schools from the highest poverty clear down to their very lowest poverty. And then they have to determine where they're going to draw the line as to how many schools they can serve. They cannot serve any school with poverty below 35%. And schools that have 40% poverty or higher can operate what we call a school-wide Title I program where every student is considered eligible, and so their funding can support things across the school. Schools below 40% have to do a targeted assistance Title I program where they identify the students in the school that are the most academically at risk, and it is not based on the student's family income level. So I could be the highest socioeconomic student, coming from the highest SES family in that school, but if I'm the most academically at risk, I would need to be served. Someone else in my same class could be coming from the highest poverty family in the school, but if they were achieving well, they may not get services in a targeted assistance Title I school. But in school-wide, every student benefits from that funding. So that's why we have disparities, is the LEAs get their portion of money and then they have to allocate that money out. And they have to set aside money at the district level for a number of things. For example, Mariana's here representing private schools. And so if there are private schools that are nonprofit schools that want to participate and have students that would attend a neighborhood school within a district boundary that is a Title I school, then that district has the responsibility to provide services to those private schools to serve those children that are their responsibility because they live within that regular school district's boundaries. So they have to set aside money right off the top for that purpose. They have to set aside money to serve their homeless students. Even if they get McKinney-Vento homeless funds, they still have to set aside funds. That's required. They have to set aside some funding for parent and family engagement activities. So then once the LEA has set aside the money that's required, then they have money left that then they determine how they're going to allocate that to their schools. And there's no set amount, so every LEA is different in how they do that.
Do you know one thing that comes to mind a little bit is that I noticed that your larger districts, just because your size, have more ability to support at the top end. Their structure is larger than both the smaller districts and charters. So the resources in the larger districts, and it goes along with that location, but I think that those in the smaller districts and charters wears a lot of hats. And I think that that's something that needs to be taken into consideration with that, because for the kids.
Yeah, so I was thinking along the same line, that's capacity to deliver the instructional services and supporting services that are needed. I'm not sure how you would gather that information. I mean, do they have parent-teacher councils that are effective? It's a whole variety of capacity and support structures that I think would help determine whether the services could be even delivered. Again, I have no idea how you would collect that information.
We could, well, I guess this is where my thoughts are going, that we could probably collect that stuff through the competitive aspect of it, where we could say, what we're trying to determine is lack of capacity, therefore you need more resources to make that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how we would collect that through like a formula amount.
Maybe just the number of students served total or size of the LEA, if you're making assumptions.
When you're looking at the formula grant, because Title III accountability for English learners is now in Title I, you might want to think about what Provo does, which is they do a weighted per pupil allocation based on the level of language proficiency of students. So if you're a level 1 kid, then you're going to get more resources, because typically what happens based on looking at the data, they actually progress more quickly. And then they get stuck, right, when things get more challenging when you're a level 3 or a level 4. And because the assessment has been recalibrated to career and college readiness, then the issue related to being redesignated, again, is an issue, because now ESSA is requiring identifying long-term ELs. So if you actually have students who've been in your system, since kindergarten, and they're in high school and they're still not reclassified, then the question is, they're not going to have much of a future unless they're reclassified by middle school. So the whole issue around long-term ELs in relationship to a standard formula and all that data is accessible. So that would be the other issue related to keeping schools out of actually targeted support, because they're going to end up being in that, either in turnaround because of state accountability is now aligned with disaggregated groups of English learners and annual growth goals anyway. So that might be another consideration. And Provo actually does it very, very well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So moving forward just with that formula piece, one of the things that we would want to do is work with our data and statistics folks to implement some models with some weightings on a lot of those indicators, just to see what it would look like, where the money would fall out. So that's going to be some pretty technical meeting with them to figure some of those things out and have some information moving forward. Is in regards to that, are there any other indicators or any suggestions in how to do that or where to look for maybe examples of that? Provo is a good example.
Well, there is a formula for necessarily small schools that's used just for statewide funding. That you may want to just look at that to see how that's identified if we're trying to look at a weighting for rural.
Okay, excellent.
That's a good idea.
Good idea. Okay. Dr. Muir? Can't hear her. I know she's listening in. Okay, thank you. After the meeting's over, or even during the meeting, if other things pop into your mind, we can.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Daniel said, would it be appropriate to look at number of new teachers in a school when looking at this allocation, extra training, et cetera?
Yeah, I was actually, I'm glad she brought that up because I was like, I wanted to see even the retention or the retaining of certain teachers, because you've got some areas where it's tough, but teachers stay there, but there are some where it's a revolving door as well.
Yeah, good.
Another one is the percentage of your teachers that are on ARLs. They're coming in under alternative paths because those teachers are not only dealing with teaching in the classroom, they're at the same time trying to get up to full licensure. So their weight is different, I think.
Good. Yeah, we talked about this and we were blue in the face. We didn't think of any of these things, so this is why you're here. Thank you. Good suggestions. Excellent. Any others before I move on to the next piece? Okay.
Sorry, one last one.
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
No,
don't be sorry. I know, I don't even know why I'm saying sorry. I actually don't like when people say that, and now I'm saying
you're helping me and you're apologizing too.
I was thinking about, kind of the capacity of the LEAs back to retaining and recruiting teachers. If they have anything in place to already do that. Because there are some areas that give, more money for teachers and maybe teacher pay and things like that. I don't know, anything that is surrounded or surrounds the idea of teachers, like what it looks like to be a teacher in that community or that area, I think would be,
We just went over our district data last night in our board meeting, and you could tell exactly when teachers left. It was phenomenal as we looked at the ACT and the different scores we've got in our district, and knowing we're a fairly small district, so we knew our teachers, but you knew exactly when one of that group had left. And what we were seeing, and apparently it's understood, is it's 3 years to get that group back up to where they were previous. It was fascinating, and it was very apparent in looking at our stats.
I don't know, in connecting to that, I am thinking about how in San Juan District, how they've really built up that collaborative structure to retain, to retain teachers.
Yeah.
So I really like the conversation about both recruitment and retention. And, but I don't know how specific we would want to be in, it sounds like recruitment and retention is a great general, but also really making sure that we're using the research and data to not just say whatever you think is good for recruitment and retention, but what do we know is working?
Yeah.
So just a follow-up question on that particular question based on the other question. So as an indicator to factor in for a weighting on the formula amount, would we be looking at they have something in place and we would give it more weighting if it's evidence-based it's got some history of demonstrating success, or would that be something that we would move into a competitive aspect that they would respond to?
Do you have an opinion?
I think it should be competitive because I think it might be an opportunity that they've seen that's working, that they can use the money for to continuously do this. Because a lot of times we're like, okay, school's improved. We'll give you this money to support you to do this work. Okay, now you've improved. We've taken everything away from you. And those are the things that we need for schools to continuously stay improving. And so maybe they had money for a little bit for those programs and they've lost it. And I feel like if they can at least say, like, these are things that we've done in the past that have helped us. If we continue to have these funds, we can continuously keep these teachers.
And I was leaning toward competitive, but I agree with everything you just said. And I also think that even more than competitive, I feel like it has to be intentional. And that the research has to be there. So even if it's in formula, it's like you can't just say, I'm going to do this. It has to be specific, whether it's the Q-tip or whatever, and it has to be based on research. Not just, I think this is a good, fun thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, running the risk of being a storyteller and making Becky roll her eyes. There was one school that our colleague Chuck Foster and I visited, who they were addressing a teacher retention and recruitment issue. They had a lot of teachers leaving, and so they had received some supplemental funds specifically for that. So what the principal did was he went to the staff and said, okay, we really need to have a frank conversation. What's going to bring you back? And the simple answer that came back was they were tired of traveling long distances. So they used this supplemental funding to purchase 2 buses. They had 100% of those teachers return the next year. Wow. And almost 100% of those teachers return the year after that. So we can make a difference. There are things like that. So I kept thinking about that. I thought, what a simple thing. They went to the teachers and asked them what would bring them.
Yeah, oh wow.
Not an honest answer.
See what your users need.
A bus. If we had somebody drive us here, we would all come back. Okay, thank you. I'm going to use the opportunity to transition. So from our almost $3 million specifically for school improvement and specifically for CSI schools, comprehensive support and improvement schools, a portion is going to be set aside for a base amount. Any school that is identified gets a certain amount to be determined. Then after that, a formula, and we'll have to consider some of these indicators that we had put on that slide there, and then some of the really good ones that I hadn't thought of or we hadn't mentioned before. Then there's going to be a portion of money that's left over. That portion of money that's left over would move into this competitive amount. What we had decided the last time we met that competitive amount and an application for those funds must be based on results of the needs assessment, root cause analysis, and then evidence-based strategies in a plan that will address those root causes. There are a couple other things you said today that that are new to that, and it was something that Murray said that I wrote down here, but I didn't write that Murray said it. But the other thing is that teacher recruitment and retention, evidence-based and intentional activities that they have, or the lack thereof, or the need for those types of things. Is there anything else that we may want to consider through the competitive aspect of this?
Where do you measure parent engagement in any of this?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Because there's
my vanilla Coke.
Now these are there's a portion of the overall Title I funds that have to be set aside for parent engagement, and these are supplemental to those funds, the school improvement funds. So I guess the follow-up question I would ask is, do you think it would be important to have that be a competitive piece of it to get those extra competitive?
Well, after sitting in on the Fun Beyond presentation and learning that family engagement is one of the 5 elements that if it's not there, then there's a less than 10% chance that turnaround is going to happen, then I think
it's always nice when someone else says it.
I mean, it could be identified through that root cause that there is a lack of parent engagement activity. So that would be the thing we're addressing, is we need the supplemental funds on top of the formula amounts because we've identified a need that we need extra resources to address.
Max, when I said capacity to build, that's what I was talking about. There is parent engagement. The three-legged stool, the students, the community, and the staff. If any one of those three legs is missing, this whole thing's going to have a wobble to it and it'll falter. So how you measure that is up to you, but that whole capacity to deliver is, to me, a critical factor. Even though you may have the most crying need in the world, but if you don't have any capacity to address the needs, there's still going to remain a need.
Thank you. Good. Yes, that was the one.
Well, if parent engagement isn't identified as a focus, it doesn't happen. I mean, it just doesn't. And so if it's in, if it's identified as a focus from this group, then something happens. But if you don't identify it as
good, okay.
How about ownership by the board, by the district board? If you don't have chief administrators engaged in the process, it's likewise going to kill it. There has to be that senior level engagement and ownership, and somehow I think that has to be shown as a leading factor. I mean, we're coming in external to this, and if there's no local ownership, we're foisting something upon them that may or may not succeed, and the moment the money's gone, so is the process. So we have to look for a long-term viability, and that's exhibited in board rule, senior leadership basically putting their reputation on the line that they will make it happen.
So in an application for this competitive piece of funding, they would have to demonstrate that there is.
As an example, when I do my civil rights on-site reviews, the person who signs off on this is the superintendent, because it always involves money, always involves cultural change and so forth. And the superintendent doesn't sign off, I might as well not even do the business because it's not going to go anywhere. It'll just die in the vine. Even if a principal signs off and agrees to it, it's going to have some negative weight from the district, and some way, not prohibiting it, but definitely stalling it or weighing it down to achieve its maximum capacity. That's making sense of all that.
Especially if the principal leaves and goes with it.
The more we get this to be systemic and it's not personality related, the more it becomes systems driven, the greater the likelihood it'll survive and thrive.
Well, I think there are two issues related to that. With parent engagement, we actually had this amazing focus group with about 40 parents, refugees, immigrant parents, all parents of English learners. And there were amazing parent leaders who wanted to have the district develop a leadership curriculum for parents so they could actually be engaged in the governance of the schools, the school community council, because you can engage parents, but if they don't actually understand the policies and the lack of communication across, for example, departments like Ed Equity and Curriculum, as well as the supervisors of the principals, there can't be any sustainability at all, because the district is siloed and they're not working together in a way that supports developing the leadership with parents. Parents, they were very clear that they wanted to develop leadership skills so they could actually see budgets in schools. They don't want to be, marginalized as, yes, we have this way to engage you, but you don't really have any access to how funds are being spent or how decisions are being made or anything like that.
So it would be a response to a question for the competitive, it would be a piece of the application.
Yeah. So it's like, again, it goes back to this idea of, how are you building capacity and sustainability for parent leadership in your schools?
Mm-hmm. The parents will be a lot longer than the administration will do, hopefully.
Yeah, because they have generations and generations of kids, and when they see a system that doesn't respond to them, like child after child after child, it ends up being a big investment for them.
Who are the targeted schools? Are there specific levels, elementary, junior, middle, high school? Who are the target schools?
So the identification of the CSI schools are all high schools at 67% graduation or below.
Okay.
And then it's the bottom 5% on the state accountability system of Title I schools. Which
and
would
it's
be-
tricky in places like Salt Lake that don't identify any of their high schools as Title I.
Right.
So they might be above 67% for graduation rate, but they have, you know, like you said, it's at the local level to decide who gets the funds as well. So.
And just to, I don't know if to say a caution or an addition, every school district evaluates their superintendent at least every 2 years. And and from the Utah School Boards, we put out a very formulaic survey to go over and see. And if your superintendent's not meeting these goals, they're not slipping by. And your superintendent can't just say, oh, we're just going to write that off, because the board knows what's going on. So when you say we're kind of putting the screws to the superintendents, I think they're already getting pressure from their boards. And there's groups, things have changed where it used to be, oh, yeah, the superintendent takes care of everything. The boards, in 99% of the cases that I'm familiar with, are very in tune with what's happening, and their superintendent's responsive to them. So I don't think we've got superintendents slipping through. They are evaluated, and their job is predicated upon that evaluation by their local board.
Awesome.
And we strongly encourage every other year, at least, if formative, summative, set up every other year.
One more thing, I don't know how you say it as far as, but the extended learning for like the kids that are coming into preschool or for preschoolers. I know that it doesn't seem like there's enough money, but there should be something provided, a little boot camp or something for the kids that are coming into kindergarten, or extended days, something that's going to help the RTI and the systems that you have within the day may not be enough. So what can the schools provide with that extra money before or after, or for kids that are coming in to the schools?
Okay.
I mean, I know they're provided that money, but some don't see that portion as important. They don't align it at all.
They don't align the pre-K or the after-school programs. Some do, some they just consider them separate pots.
And especially with these outlying schools, they need that extra help to get those. If there's not preschools available for them outside, in their communities, and then the schools need to help them with that.
Good. I have to even turn the paper. That's a good sign. Okay. Any other items to consider for the competitive piece of school improvement funds? Because I want to move on to a separate but related issue. Through the development of the ESSA Consolidated Plan, one of the things that Leslie had referenced is under the previous statute, ESEA, we were working under a flexibility waiver, so we were identifying, if you remember these terms, and Leslie mentioned, priority and focus schools. So we were working to implement a specific process with those schools: needs assessments, plan development, plan implementation, follow-up evaluation, professional development, all those things. We had developed at the state a handbook that delineated all of those processes and procedures. When you go into a school to conduct a needs assessment, there's a particular process and a form and a template, so those things were somewhat universal. At the same time, our legislature passed a school turnaround initiative, and it was largely a outside provider bill. What we had for Title I school improvement was schools that were identified for school improvement. There was a vetted list of school support team members and leaders, each identifying an expertise. They had to submit a resume, the whole bit, and so they were selected. So if a school was identified, they could choose one of those folks or a number of those folks to form a team to come into that school to implement the processes and procedures that we had outlined in the handbook: a needs assessment, a root cause analysis, a plan development, plan implementation, evaluation, monitoring, adjusting course, those types of things. So moving forward, we've been working with the Center on School Turnaround at West Ed and a number of stakeholder input, and we've updated that particular handbook moving forward under ESSA. It's called the Continuous Cycle of Improvement, and it's based in 4 domains. Culture shift, leadership, instruction, and talent management are essentially those 4 domains. So the needs assessment is based in those 4 domains. Plan development, responding to the needs assessment. Plan implementation, based on all of those kind of things, and it goes into a continuous improvement cycle. The question that we have is the board moving forward through our ESSA plan instructed us to better align state school turnaround and federal school improvement. So if you were identified as a state school turnaround school, or you were identified as a Title I school improvement school, that the processes and procedures for either one would be the same. So you would have a needs assessment conducted. There would be a root cause analysis. There would be outside help to come in. State school turnaround is required that we have a vetted and approved, USB approved list of outside providers that the schools can contract with and come in and help them to develop a school improvement plan based on their needs assessment and root cause analysis, and then carry through that cycle. The question we have now is for Title I schools. We have some options that we can do moving forward. So if a school is identified as a CSI school under Title I, we have the option of moving forward similarly as we did in the past with a vetted list of professionals that have expertise in certain things that schools could choose from to come in and help develop the plan and implement the plan. The other option is we could also have those particular outside providers that are vetted for a USBE for state school turnaround be an option for schools to choose from, or it could be both or some other option. So we're asking the question, what would you prefer if you were in a school, you're in the district? I mean, what would be the best option for you? If you have experience in the past working with one or the other, that kind of insight would be good as well. That was a loaded question, apparently.
Well, I'm just thinking, why wouldn't it be both options? Like, are we thinking that those that are working with state turnaround would already have a full load, so let them just continue to work with them? Is that, or we don't want it to be a monopoly? Like, what are the pros and cons, or the cons, I guess, of letting them choose from whoever they want to choose from?
And please jump in, anybody on the team here that has, I can't speak for the schools specifically in regards to that, but we have had feedback occasionally from schools that feel cornered into selecting one of the USB list of providers.
Yeah, okay.
So it would be a different option. It would be expanding the options to select somebody who had expertise or something specifically to the root causes that have been identified in your school.
Yeah. That's what I was like, there's something that I'm missing, but I see what you're saying. Okay.
Can you give an option of saying off the vetted list or whom
That's
you
the both
choose?
one, right?
Yeah,
whoever you choose,
it could be either or.
validate your reason for wanting to choose somebody else.
If you have a list of criteria that you made in getting that list,
right,
then if they had others that could provide that same validation, or they had to have those credentials, I think choice is important because they know their incoming students, and yes, they've had problems, but I think we need to me it's treating them like professionals. They know their population, they know the needs, they know their staff, and they might be able to find that fit better than just having to choose from a list.
Okay. Would there be any conflicts of interest that might preclude somebody from being chosen? If there are, you may want to list those.
Okay.
Maybe that's one thing they have to show that there isn't. They sign up something that isn't
no
a conflict of interest.
And you list what those potential conflicts of interest
right.
are.
I just don't want schools to be cornered. That concerns me. That they're feeling like they're forced to work with a certain vendor because they worked with them in the past, and they might be like, well, that's why I need someone new because it didn't really work before, you know? I don't know if there are any rules around that.
You also need decent evidence-based results because You've got all kinds of people wandering through saying, hey, look at this program.
Right.
That may or may not serve.
On the flip side, when I was working in Alberta education, we were developing models somewhat similar to this, and we gave a list of consultants and said, these have been vetted. Please trust us, that we're not trying to pin you in a hole or paint you into a corner, whatever the case may be, and we had very little resistance.
Yeah, and it might be helpful just in this context. So for state turnaround for the cohort 2 schools, we did a request for statements of qualifications, and we put that out to any outside provider that had worked with USB in any regards. As a matter of fact, some of those that were included were agencies that came in and worked on the roof. So, I mean, it was a broad net that we sent out there. So we had, we had 12 providers that responded to the request for statements of qualifications, and essentially what we asked for is you have demonstrated expertise and experience working with turnaround schools, that you can show evidence that you've made an impact in those schools. And then we had one indicator that talked about work in Utah schools or through the Utah system. So those were just some of the qualifiers. So there was a rating system that a committee went through qualifying or vetting those particular respondents, and 9 of the 12 were selected. So the schools that were identified in State School Turnaround could pick or choose to send out RFPs to those 9 and then select one. So that would be, so moving forward, if we have that as an option, it's, how that would work in moving forward with Title I schools. We would have an SST approved list of people with expertise that could come in and help form a team, but then there would also be a set of vendors with similar expertise. It's a little more complicated that way, but what I'm hearing you say is that the choice is important, that the options.
Something that just popped in my mind, I think it'd be really interesting if you talk to cohort 1 principals from Turnaround and just simply ask them that question. Like, and get 100% answers. Like, make sure everyone asks you like what they would have liked to have happened, or even their district leaders, and just maybe get their feedback too, along with ours.
That's a really good idea.
And one other thought is, what's your timeline in terms of turning this around? So what if someone says, I don't find anyone on your list of providers that I want to use, I would want to use person or group X. Can you then vet them to see if they meet the criteria rather than some other, I'm not sure what else I want to say on that, but it's just, do you have time to actually vet a potential 15th vendor?
That's an interesting, I guess the first thing I'm thinking of is the schools are going to be identified in December, so we want to have this kind of thing selected. I would suppose, because we're talking about formula amounts, I mean, we couldn't allocate funds until this piece had been implemented, because what that would mean is they hadn't designed a plan based on the root cause analysis yet or anything like that. So, I mean, I think the turnaround would be, and help me out here, the turnaround would be as fast as they want to receive their funds and start implementation.
Max,
Yeah.
we have a question from Danelle Muir.
Dr. Muir.
She wants to know if school support teams would be from USBE, as in USBE personnel.
In the past, it had been anyone that demonstrated an expertise and had submitted an application for it with references. So we'd call the references and everything. There were a number of folks from USBE on that team, but it wasn't limited to folks on USBE's staff. There were a lot of outside folks that were also
We have a lot of LEA personnel that have expertise in various areas. It might have been leadership, it might have been parent engagement, it could have been math or language arts or working with English learners or budgeting or systems change, strategic planning. So they identified 3 areas where they thought they had expertise that could be lent to this.
I told good fish stories. That's how I got it.
So here's another question. Not that I'm, increasingly more and more skeptical in relationship to vendors, but I think the issue is actually related to whether the support that's actually provided to schools has an impact on what really happens in schools and the outcomes for students. We're getting farther and farther and farther away from looking at what's really happening to the students based on the package that a vendor provides, and even the feedback given to schools in trying to identify a root cause analysis where English learners, are not getting the services that they deserve. And then the root cause is something about the SAGE test, but it has nothing to do with language acquisition, because nobody on the provider team understands language acquisition. So there has to be some way that people who are providing, it's not just that they're giving us references for what they do, but
can demonstrate.
What have they demonstrated and what kind of impact have they had? What have their services really done for schools, that have contracted with them? And we're talking about people who are making, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then you go into schools in year 2 and 3 and there's no change. No change in the instruction, no change in student outcomes, no engagement with families.
Don't apologize, I've always been suspect of vendors.
No, I agree with Christelle in that sense that there's an inherent issue in having a vendor come in, right, and have a created package that they try to briefly change or briefly meet the criteria for what the needs of that school are, but really don't address the issues that are really going on there.
It's on the premise, this works for every school.
Right.
Disregards context.
Right. And the value is, for their purpose in being there, is that they are meeting the needs of that specific school site, not bringing in a pre-made package that may or may not work, but we have it, so it's easy, and that's what we're going to offer this school, when really it's not meeting the kids' needs in any way, shape, or form.
They're not looking at the school, they're looking at I've developed a program.
Right.
And
that's what
it
I'm
needs to be,
saying.
yeah, that's,
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
I think we have a computer question.
Yeah, Danielle's, sorry, my voice just went out. She added a few comments here. In the past, the SST people just went in for the beginning audit or review, and then a contracted provider continued the process on their own. Is this still the same practice, or is this SST leader not necessarily a contracted provider? I'm just looking for clarification.
And I think that'd be a question for the group. I think in the past what had happened is, that's right, they would select one of the people off of the SST list who went in to conduct a needs assessment and root cause. Now then it would have been up to that LEA in that school to decide whether to contract for continuation of those services, plan development, plan implementation, etc. So that would be a question for the group. I mean, is that, because I'm kind of, what I'm hearing is the option that you're thinking would be the best option is for both that there would be an SST list, but also an option for schools and LEAs to select one of those vendors as long as either or could demonstrate that they could make an impact. They had evidence to demonstrate, or they have an experience or a history to show that they could do that, to be on that list. That doesn't answer Danielle's question, though.
Of what they do after.
Yeah, well, this is, now, and let me clarify, I should have said this up front. One of the things we've been working with our purchasing and contracts director is asking the question because under state school turnaround, it's required under that statute that we set aside funds to go in and can have an agency different from the vendor list go in and conduct a needs assessment and root cause analysis. Then the schools contract with one of those approved vendors to come in and develop a plan based on the root cause report, implement the plan, and then carry the rest of that work out for the other 2 years. What we've been talking to Zach Christensen about is whether we could do something similar for Title I CSI schools, that we have an agency or a different provider come in and do the needs assessment and root cause analysis, and then have one of these SST members or one of the vendors come in and develop a plan based on that report and moving forward.
How's it gone? This first, or is it too early to say? Did you like the process?
Well, you know, we were kind of building the plane while we were flying it. So fortunately, the group we contracted with to conduct the needs assessment and root cause analysis was very flexible. They had a lot of experience. They were very knowledgeable and could provide some really good, clear feedback. But in that same regards, just because we hadn't done it before, the needs assessment and root cause reports needed some polishing up in order to make them a little bit more useful. And we're still in the process of, as the providers are in those schools developing plans, there's had to be a lot of communication. So it's worked. We just need to get it a little bit more polished up. But I think it's a little better than having the same agency conduct a needs assessment and then develop a plan based on their needs assessment. You know what I mean? It separates the two, so they really have to address the root causes. The first agency who does the needs assessment and root cause, they're not gaining anything by what they identify. Right. And so the second group that comes in is bound by what has been identified independently. They're not coming in and changing it.
I know we're like new in this model that we did this year, but I feel like maybe that's something that we can learn through and maybe try to stick with that to see how that goes.
Yeah, and I think that's a direction that we're moving forward. So, you know, in that respect, what we're talking about or what I'm asking for is that second group, SSTs or vendors who come in and take the root cause report and then develop the plan, implement the plan, work with the school.
Okay, so to Janelle's question, it's not really the people doing the root cause analysis.
Right.
It's those that are helping after. Okay.
Right. Yeah, thanks for bringing me back to the question. I was on my way to that. I kind of petered out before I got to the end.
And the plan's not written by the SST team lead nor the outside vendor. It's obviously done in concert with the school and
So I was going to say, because it sounded like what you were saying, Max, is what you're hearing is let's have the group that we are pre-approving, but then if someone wanted to bring in a different person or a different vendor, they would go through that approval process. And it sounded like you were saying, is that what you're hearing?
What I'm hearing is that you feel like it would be better for schools, LEAs, to have the option to choose either an SST person off of that approved list or one of the vendors off of the USBE approved list. It would be their option. But that once selected, or going through that vetting process, that those SST members or those vendors have to really demonstrate that they have made an impact in schools, they can make an impact in schools, and they agree to really address the root causes that were identified.
And I would say that showing that impact completely ties to what the root cause and the specific implementation is. So to kind of go back to Christelle's comment, that it's not about SAGE scores when their root cause says it really should be something else. That the evidence that they have to show directly ties to the root cause and their work plan based on that.
Okay. Thank you. Are there anything additional things that I haven't addressed or that I missed?
I guess still my concern is how do we guarantee that this doesn't slip back to where we were prior to the interventions being put into place and theoretically been systematized? And I know that's reaching into the future where we can't necessarily go, but I don't want to see all this effort and then all of a sudden we're back to where we were when we started where the whole problem arose in the first place.
Oh, like what the monitoring's like during
the monitoring, the cultural shift, the support structure, the change in the way of operations, the engagement of parents who can also help buttress that and make sure they become part of the monitoring system. How do we guarantee, how do they show that 3 years after this intervention, which is going to be very costly in time, talents, and resources, how do we, I mean, that's true for almost any aspect of life, but how do we have them assure us that they're not going to go back to notch 1 when we want them to move out to notch 10? That make sense?
Yeah, question. And what I've heard you say a couple of times is assurances. So,
but I just don't want them to sign up a bunch of assurances. Anyone can sign those off. What
will be repercussions for not sustaining?
I'm not sure repercussions have kind of a punitive approach to it. I want them to look at this from a
What?
Ecology, we're going to make a difference, and we're going to not let this thing slide back to wherever it
Ongoing
was.
excellence.
So there'd be some sort of
Ongoing
reward
excellence.
to
Yeah, ties in
continue
and
We're
excellence.
talking about sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability
So
in
what
the
is-
upward
yeah,
slope
right,
rather
so
than
how do you
flat or.
Maintain that growth. that
Yeah,
you
how
put
did the
in
pay
place.
for by performance 50% upon signing with the school and 50% upon approval? How did that go?
That's a loaded question because the requirements for exiting state school turnaround was that the school improved 1 letter grade. So that's based on a point total in the state accountability system and a percentage of points. So there's a threshold. 2015 there was a threshold that correlated with a grade. So in 2018 it would have been they beat that threshold and improved 1 letter grade. So then they exited. What that means in the long term, we've just identified cohort 1 and those schools that improved 1 letter grade and have exited and those who haven't. That was just done like this last week.
Yeah.
So it'll be hard, if those schools continuously get identified moving forward, we'll know that it didn't work or wasn't sustainable, but.
You have a comment?
Yeah.
Sorry. The next question is, would there be specific benchmarks that a provider or SST leader would need to be based on the needs assessment root cause? And if so, who would monitor that?
I can answer, the way it's designed for state school turnaround is that the provider we have that did the needs assessment and root cause is also the provider that's going to do the ongoing monitoring based on the goals set in the plan that address the root causes and then the progress towards those goals, and they will report back to us on that. And they will also do a final evaluation.
Well, can I think I heard what I heard. I want to make sure I heard what I heard. Those who identify the problems are the ones that can be also providing the solutions?
No.
Okay.
They're going to be monitoring the solutions.
Okay, so is there any conflict of interest in the process here? I'm not sure if I heard that correctly.
I think actually what it does, Murray, is it eliminates the previous conflict of interest because previously the provider that was working with the school was also doing the evaluation and monitoring.
Yeah, that's absolutely
and progress.
And
So
determining what the causes were and then writing a plan that met what they were going to present.
okay, I think I've sufficiently beat a couple of these issues to death. I thank you very much. This is a lot to think about. We'll put these all together in notes. I've gotten the cutoff sign, so thank you very much.
Yeah, we kind of need to be cognizant of our time here.
Thank you for helping me help Leslie and I do our job.
But I wanted to make sure that Jolie Honey joined us a little after we've done interviews.
I was late.
Jolie is our STEM coordinator here at the Utah State Board of Education, and she's also the lead on the Title 4A, which is a new competitive, well, it was competitive last year. Going forward, it will be formula. It is the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant, which takes in a lot of different areas: school safety, mental health-based prevention acronyms, as well as content area.
Is there an acronym for that?
The SSAE is the acronym for the Student Support and Academic Enrichment. And the 30-second version is that it has a really strong focus on well-rounded, which includes a lot of the different content areas, and then also the safe and healthy students is our two primary areas of focus. The third on ESSA is the effective use of technology, and that component is what we kind of embed into the first two of safe and healthy students and well-rounded. Okay.
Yeah, so the first group of LEAs that received funding last year are just starting the implementation process of those grants that they got. Then also Marianne, I know I'll not pronounce your last name correctly, but
Roja Heggie.
yeah, Marianne represents, as I said, private schools, and she's the principal of St. Francis School, right?
Xavier and Kearns for a Title I school.
Yes. So we'll turn the time now to Dr. Estrada, and she'll talk to us about the changes that she's proposed for the English Learner Indicator in our accountability system.
So in your packet, if you look at the draft where it says proposed Utah ESSA ELP English Language Proficiency Amendment. So I'll just give you a brief background, and you don't have to read all of it, but I'll tell you why this is a critical issue in relationship to what we've just discussed. The federal accountability and state accountability is now aligned so that all schools are accountable for English learners if they have the number 10, so 10 English learners. And those students making progress based on annual growth goals. Now, when we submitted the ESSA plan, there were some issues related to calculations where the annual growth target was a 0.4. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is when we had a consultant from CCSSO, and we actually have, no one's here from Ogden, but we had the Ogden district run their own data. They realized that the trajectory for becoming English proficient in Utah would be like about 10 years. So there was like a serious issue related to what we actually know, not only based on research related to the variables, which are if a student is proficient in their first language, right, if they're literate in their first language, and they come in at a certain grade level, whatever that proficiency level is and whatever grade level it is, determines their trajectory to becoming English proficient, because the goal ultimately is not just becoming English proficient, but English proficiency so that students have access to academic content at the grade level, right? Because otherwise, if you're not English proficient pretty much before middle school, where you crash and burn as an English learner, and then you end up going to high school, and then you even do worse. The problem is that we have to identify and individualize based on their entrance and their proficiency level and their grade level to determine annual growth related to grade level on those variables, so that the annual growth is determined and personalized more than, okay, this linear thing that everybody now, no matter who you are and where you are and what grade level, if it's a 0.4, then you're successful. And it'll take you, 15 years to become English proficient. So the reason, again, this is important is that it goes to this idea of personalizing the way in which instruction happens for students who are in regular classes. And we've seen this, especially at middle and high school, when you have all levels of English proficiency and they're in math. I've seen some of the most interesting math classes in elementary school that's really well scaffolded and has lots of academic conversation around mathematical vocabulary, which is really wonderful. And that's what we want to highlight. And this happens in like one school in a district, and like none of the other schools know that like this particular grade level, in this particular school, that's a Title I school with about 70% ELs, the math instruction is just like extraordinary. So the whole goal is to more personalize the way in which we provide technical assistance and feedback to school districts based on the actual quality of classroom instruction, so that they use the student data to differentiate in a way that really supports kids and families to understand their growth goals toward proficiency. So that's the reason we got permission to develop an amendment, pretty much like the main model, and it would be organized in grade bands early on, like grades 1 to 3, and then if you look at the grade level 4 to 7, because we're trying to mitigate that transition that happens from elementary to middle, and then from 9 to 12. The draft of the methodology is going to be pretty complicated because it's very individualized based on the individual student and those two variables and individual schools. But if you look at the last page, you'll see the percentage points in the accountability system, which ends up being, I think, when you look at state accountability, the EL annual growth goals will be 9% of the state accountability. So it'll be, I don't have a graph, but it's 9% of the total. And the way it's defined is the number of ELs making adequate progress, so it's annual progress, and ELs reaching proficiency, which based on the WIDA test is a composite of 5. And divided by the number of current English learners minus the students who are first-year ELs. So students who come in and it's their first year and their levels, this are newcomers, right? The calculation, they're taken out of the calculation so that it doesn't, skew and impact the schools that have lots of newcomers, like Granite has a huge refugee population. And they're doing really innovative things with parents and families and communities. So this is an attempt to really redesign even the monitoring system to look at classroom instruction. Because when we got the report back from the feds, the peer reviewers asked us, how is the state agency going to support the districts in developing the capacity to provide grade level instruction that focuses on academic content, which if you think about it is really challenging, right? So that's what we've been doing. We have a team, large teams that go into districts and into classrooms, provide feedback for their instruction, and make recommendations systemically to look at the way in which they use data to more differentiate and individualize instruction. So we think we're moving in a positive direction. And it's challenging, and the fact that we've done some visits and districts have been really amazing. Granite School District was not only appreciative of the commendations, but incredibly thankful for the recommendations in relationship to what individual schools needed to support their English learners in a different way. So this is a different way of thinking about what monitoring would look like. So what questions do you have? Yes?
My question is related to some of my observations of also going around the state. And I'm not really that concerned with, I'm using the word concern, meaning like I feel like places like Granite District are in the right path and Provo's on the right path. I'm really, really concerned about some of our rural districts where we actually really need some of those stronger forms of instruction there, and it's not happening. So I guess my question is, when you're looking at these, these teachers that are doing really great things and a lot of other places don't know about them, how can we get that?
Well, that's why we do the Utah's Promising Practices website, where we have mass dissemination at the UEM website. So every time we visit schools and identify those, then we work with the principal in the school district to actually videotape them. If you look at the Utah's Promising website, Granite is an example. And then every time we do that, we actually make sure that we have a process for dissemination. So it's not just, on the USB website hidden under Title III, but it's actually UEN and disseminated through the ALS directors, which is throughout the state.
So Christelle,
Yes.
Are you looking for some of the, I'm guessing, I'm kind of asking a rhetorical question. If we have pockets of excellence, if you will, of what we do think is good instruction, do we contact you? Are you the person that we should be connecting with?
What we do is we actually connect it to monitoring, right? So we have a schedule where we're, doing monitoring visits and visiting classrooms, and during that time, we actually identify those classrooms specifically related to Title III, because that's integrated into their self-assessment tool and the way in which they apply. It's all connected to Title III funding. And they have to actually put those things about how are they going to disseminate and respond to the findings in relationship to their application. So Nancy's probably been working on, from Jordan, she's probably been working on the self-assessment tool.
Yes.
Because it's very specific in relationship to the evidence that you're using to demonstrate the way in which you're using resources to work with schools and identifying those promising practices to disseminate within your district. So it's all embedded in the grants management system, which is kind of different than most systems. When you ask for money, You know, generally, no one's really asking you things like, you know, how are you going to reallocate resources based on your promising practices actually in your district to those schools that aren't performing well. So it's kind of like a tight connection to the way in which we monitor Title III instruction for English learners. I mean, you can refer them to me, but you know, then the challenge is it would be this disconnected kind of thing. I mean, the whole point is to try to disseminate it in a way that districts, and Nancy, you can talk about this if you want, actually align their resources related to what's really happening in the classrooms in the schools.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point.
I'm just thinking about Cheryl's comment and rural areas, and it sounds like there is a strong connection for when there's something wonderful happening in Jordan District, that you're able to connect that with the Title III and then being able to share and show that within the district. But it also sounds like you're able to share that statewide.
Because remember, the EL indicator is now in Title I schools, right? Mm-hmm. So it's pretty much everywhere, and it's also connected to state accountability and school grades. So, I mean, that's the other issue in relationship to dissemination.
And as part of that, so the Utah Promising Practices website here, I just looked up the promising practices, and they're highlighting some granite community centers, and they have little videos and whatnot there, okay, so that those schools that are more rural, and I don't know that they know about it.
Right, they
well,
probably
I
don't.
But it's brand new, though, right?
Yeah, it's just been up for a month, so.
Oh, that's
we'll get the word out.
Oh, yeah.
We just gotta get the word
that's
out.
That's awesome. I missed that. Yeah, it's brand new.
Yeah. Any other questions? We're trying to align everything so that people don't have this is kind of a weird thing. People don't have to actually travel to Finland to see good instruction. They can actually see good instruction in Utah schools.
Yeah.
How about that?
How about that?
With amazing teachers. The best high school biology class for English learners is in Hillcrest. One of the best things I've seen in co-teaching.
We had a conversation. Well, Christelle, if you don't mind me saying, you also made a distinction in conversation we have that sometimes you'll hear people say, well, that was Virginia, or that was in some place in the United States. You don't even have to go to Finland for people to say, well, that's not going to work here.
That's
so
right.
This is what's working in state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was one of the big motivators, because, you know, I see like really extraordinary instruction, and then nobody knows about it. Mm-hmm. Like kindergarten, I saw some of the best kindergarten class. I saw some of the best math instruction in the 3rd grade, where they were using academic language and partners, and this little girl was going over and disagreeing with this little boy and saying, well, explain how you got that. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, that's like gold. But then nobody knows about it. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to really encourage, you know, and look at the assets and recognize and honor the people who are doing really challenging work. So anyway, that's my piece.
That's awesome.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you. For our next item, you have a handout about this. It's the 2018 National ESBA Distinguished Schools. Last year, the National Title I Association decided, and they've been working on this for a couple of years, decided that we needed to go broader than just Title I. So they changed the name of the association to the National Association of ESEA State Program Administrators. So it takes in all of the programs that are in the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which the most recent version is the Every Student Succeeds Act. So for many years, states have had the opportunity to identify and nominate 2 Title I schools that fell into one of these categories that you see listed. There's 3 categories currently. And we would reach out to superintendents. We would review data here as a team. And then we would reach out to those local superintendents or charter directors that have schools that were eligible and ask if those district and charter leaders wanted to nominate one or more of their eligible schools. We always went through the district leader first before we ever contact And then the district would send in an application on behalf of schools that they wanted to have compete for this award. So the situation we have this year is, because Max alluded to this earlier, but there are some new science assessments that were given to middle school, junior high students. And because of that, the release of all of our data from spring 2018 is delayed this year. We have to have these school names to the National Association no later than November 30th, and we will not have data available and analyzed from our data and statistics group until, they're saying, mid-December. So it put us in a bind in either we had to sit out this year and not let any schools be recognized, or look at schools that had actually been nominated last year that were eligible. So last year we had a number of applications that came in, and the schools that were selected last year were Lincoln Elementary in Ogden School District. Lincoln had an amazing transformation story. They had been in Title I school improvement. They put in one of their most dynamic principals into the school. He's Ross Lunsford. He's very humble, very quiet, very unassuming. But he went in and got that faculty on board, and that school completely blossomed and went to, I think, a B, and they were like 1 or 2 points shy of an A in school grading. So that school represented Category 1. And the school that represented Category 2 was Spring Creek Elementary in Provo School District, because, as Christelle said, they are doing incredible work in Provo, really targeting their resources, personnel, funding, support from the district toward meeting the needs of specific groups of students in their schools. So those schools both went to Philadelphia and were honored at the conference last year. So this year we went back to the applications we had received last year, because, as I said, we either have to go back to the applications that came in last year and look at those schools again, or we have to sit out. So there were 2 schools that met Category 1 and 2 from last year's nominations. So what we are proposing to do with this group's approval is Belknap Elementary School, which is a school in Beaver School District, for 3 solid years has been one of the highest performing Title I schools in the state. Data and statistics were able to give us some data on just math and language arts. We don't have all the points in the accountability system for 2018, but we do have their 2016 data and their 2017 data, and we have their rankings from math and language arts for 2018. So we would like to nominate Belknap Elementary from Beaver School District to represent Category 1. They sent in a wonderful application last year, and I spoke to Superintendent Ray Terry last week. He was absolutely delighted and overwhelmed, and I told him we were going to bring it to this committee today, and then we will contact him again if the committee chooses to do that. The school for closing the achievement gap is Wasatch Elementary in Davis School District. It's one of their most highly impacted schools in the district as far as poverty goes. And they sent in data last year. They sent in a video. They had data that showed charts where they were closing the achievement gaps between their groups. They had letters from children in the school, letters from parents, even letters that mothers had written in Spanish that had then been translated, talking about why that school was so important to them and to their children and to their community. And again, I spoke to Superintendent Newey last week, and again, they were just absolutely thrilled. So, as I said, the schools are not aware of this because, as I told both superintendents, we wanted to bring it to this committee. But if there are no opposition to that, we would like to let those 2 schools represent Utah this year. And then when we have our next meeting in the spring, we would like to come back to this committee and have you help us identify criteria going forward, because since it's not just Title I, Christelle has been to schools that are doing amazing work with English learners, but because we have no criteria right now established to say, well, we're going to choose this school because Christelle went to that school and said it was awesome. And there are other awesome schools across the state saying, wait a minute, we're doing similar stuff and nobody gave us a chance. Or there may be schools, serving refugee populations that are doing incredible work. But unless we have some criteria set up in order to select schools specifically for categories 2 and 3. Category 1 is always going to be schools that are, meet the poverty requirements and are high achieving for 2 consecutive years or more. So that one we can have our data and statistics people run that data and they can rank order those schools, and we can feel fairly secure in selecting schools and then letting district leaders and charter leaders nominate their schools. One year we actually had a superintendent who chose not to nominate a school that was eligible because the superintendent said, you might think this school is doing great work, but there are some things that we are trying to establish as district priorities, and that school is not doing those things. So we prefer the school is not honored because they're not really on board with some district level initiative. And so we said, oh wow, so we would not have known that, right? But we gave that superintendent that opportunity to say, yes, they're doing some great things, but they're not doing some really important things that we feel they need to do. And until then, we don't want them receiving a national award and then them saying, well, we don't have to do what the district is saying because, apparently we've already arrived.
Assuming non-profit Title I's are not.
No, they're not. They have to be a Title I school that's actually receiving funding.
Well, a non-profit Title I.
Well, no, they're not considered. But that's a good question, Marianne. So what we would like to do, if you feel appropriate, we would like to have those 2 schools be the Utah schools. And then what we've done in the past is given the 2 LEAs that have those schools a supplemental Title I award to support that school in sending the principal and a team to that national conference to be recognized. So at the very opening keynote session of the conference, those schools from all the states march in and they go up on the podium and they have a banner that's prepared for them and some video that's streaming with pictures of the students and the teachers at work. And then they get to go up and talk about why their school is an amazing school. And then so they have several thousand people there from across the country honoring them. So that is what we're proposing. Any points of discussion, any comments or questions? Yes, Barbara.
It's kind of excited on the Wasatch because that's also one of the United Way community schools.
Okay.
So this is very exciting that community's come together and they're seeing some.
Some good growth happening there.
Yeah.
And their application, as I said last year, was stellar. So we feel very confident. But other comments, questions, or concerns, or?
How many secondary school applications do you usually receive?
Very few, and that one reason is because we have very few secondary schools receiving Title I.
Right.
I think last year the only secondary school that was eligible was Monticello High School, and San Juan did not nominate. So we contacted San Juan, of course, but they didn't send in an application. So anyone who's opposed to us letting those 2 schools represent this year, and then we'll set up additional criteria to move forward with the following year.
Do you need a formal motion?
We may need a motion.
Do you want a formal motion?
Yes. Do you want to do that?
Okay. I'll move that we that we move Belknap Elementary from Beaver School District and Wasatch Elementary from Davis School District forward to be represented as distinguished schools.
Okay, so we have a motion.
I second it. I second it.
Nancy seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The next item I have is just informational. Our finance department here has had some feedback from some of our local superintendents and saying that there are too many groups of people or people from USBE coming on site to districts to do various kinds of monitoring or site visits, and that becomes very disruptive. So based on that feedback, a group of us met, child nutrition programs, Title I, and also special education. And we looked at LEAs that were currently going to be, coming up for monitoring visits. And we selected 3 to do a pilot. So one of those is Box Elder.
I thought this is my personal packet.
Yeah, so Nancy's here representing them. So Box Elder and then Morgan School District, their visit will occur later on in the winter. And then there's one charter, I think it's Good Foundations Charter School. So we're doing 2 districts and 1 charter just to try this, and then we're going to get a lot of feedback from these people in those LEAs so that we can then come back and meet with our finance department to say, local superintendents, you were asking for this, so we tried it, and you either hated it or you loved it, or it's very context specific, but this is the schedule, and so the superintendents of those schools, the charter directors have been notified. There are other personnel that are involved, like Title I and child nutrition. All of those people have been notified. So here's the kind of the breakdown of how that 2-day visit will go as far as entrance interviews, exit interviews, school visits. The child nutrition team, their visits are very, very in-depth and comprehensive. They have to go to numerous schools within an LEA to see if they're, following all the guidelines. They're under the direction of the Department of Agriculture, not the Department of Education, and theirs is really intense. Special education is also more intense than Title I because they actually have to look at the IEPs of individual students and then go into classrooms to see whether or not that specific child is receiving the services that have been outlined on that individual education plan. So very, very intense. So it's a combination of both fiscal monitoring and also programmatic monitoring. But I just wanted this committee to be aware of this, and when we meet next, I'll have some feedback on at least how Box Elders went and possibly Morgan's or the charge, like the dates on those. Feedback from this group would be very welcome as well.
So a lot of these visits been randomly placed before, like you had.
Yes, you have various. Yeah, you have various groups going out at different times of the year, and so some of the superintendents are saying it's especially intense for the business administrator, especially in smaller LEAs where, Granite has a large team of people that work in their accounting department. So it may not be as intense for a big district like Granite, but a smaller district like Box Elder or even smaller. We have some really small LEAs that have, one person that does all of their business work, or charter LEAs that have to contract out with other agencies that do that work for them, and so it can become very intense, as well as many of our program people wear multiple hats. So Nancy Ward, who's here from Jordan, is Title I, she's Title III, she's, she wears multiple hats. So when these visits occur, she has to be a very integral part of that.
Yeah, and we're a big district.
Yeah,
Yeah, George is one of
I
our,
have every title program plus.
yeah, so she has all of those. So, you know, this maybe Nancy would say, you know, that's too much for me all in a 2 or 3 day span to deal with Title I and Christelle from Title III and child nutrition and, you know, Murray has to go on site maybe and do something, or Jeff has to go on site and do something. And
I have
so
to go do lunch observation.
Max has to go.
Hey, I think this is a great idea.
Our food people, she's doing a huge thing on farm to table stuff, working with all the fruit orchards and the growers up in our
Oh,
area.
wonderful.
It's pretty exciting. So come to lunch, it'll be good.
Yes.
I can sign up for that.
So we're gonna try it and we'll, like I said, we'll report back.
I would say kudos to this. We faced just last year, one, next week another one, the next week another one. We couldn't get back into the daily routine.
Yeah, it's
of
very
doing things that was
disruptive.
constantly
Yeah,
trying to
very
do.
disruptive for you.
No,
Constantly
it was-
being
I-
pulled out.
Kudos for this, thank you.
So great. We'll see how it goes, and I'm hoping it's very positive.
Well, kudos for trying this, especially bringing in child nutrition, because the details they have to collect are just.
Oh yeah, it's so in depth.
Yeah, so
So in
well, this will be really interesting to see how this goes.
Yeah. That's cool. So those were my items. I'm going to turn some time over now. We have a few minutes left to Jeff Ojeda. He can talk a little bit about migrant and response to the desktop monitoring.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. So I'll keep you here for another couple hours.
Okay.
I don't know, very simple. I don't even have a handout for you. This is more informative than anything else. So back in April, we had a desktop monitor in the department looking specifically at M6 use, which is basically a national database of migrant student data. And the reason and purpose for that is that, let me backtrack just a little bit and define migrant for you so that everybody's on the same page. Okay? So a migrant student is a student that has parents or is actually working in agriculture or fishing. That's the definition of a migrant student. So what we're looking at are children who are traveling and having to travel throughout the year because of the crops, because their parents have to move, or in some cases even they are the ones doing that. So what we're looking at then is this database system that the Department of Ed uses in order to help ensure that when a student moves, for instance, from state to state, any of their student data follows them. Particularly, we're looking at language arts and math. So that coursework is also attached to their record in M6, and any state can pull that information up, and therefore ideally be able to grant that student access to the coursework that they were enrolled in the new area that they're going to be living in. And it's also a way for these families to be able to keep track of how their education is flowing so that they can be as consistent as possible as they move around. So we have a system in the state, and let me go through the brief process. Before I do that, though, let me just clarify. So that monitoring took place in April on the 19th, was the conversation with us, the USBE. Then on the 20th, Nebo School District was contacted by the department, also as part of the interview process to ensure that what we had given them in terms of our processes and data was accurate. So the monitoring happened on those 2 days. We received a report back at the end of August, and we just recently responded back to that report. That report had 8 findings. All of those 8 included and were basically procedural, and that is actually written procedures. So while they verified what we said in terms of our processes for finding migrant students and ensuring that they get accurate service, they didn't find that anywhere on our website. So there were some processes that had to be written up. So all of those were taken care of and sent back to them. There was one issue that was a little bit bigger, and that had to do with data. And the issue there was this, the way that our 2 systems coincide. So our data system and our data access, and the way that it talks to M6 and uploads all of that information. With me so far? Mm-hmm. All right. So in that regard, the issue was that M6 requires, or actually migrant ed law dictates that when a student is found as migrant, that within 10 days that the student's information is uploaded, and it includes all of the extra information, state test scores, math courses, language arts courses if they're in second. The way that we have been doing that here in the state hasn't allowed for us to update that information until the very end of the year. So you can see why that would be an issue if we have a student who moves into a new district now and we're not inputting all of that information into the system, then we can't offer that student the services they need now because we don't do that until the end of the year.
And why were we waiting?
So there was an issue, well, there are several issues. One of them is the way that the systems talk to each other. In the past, it's been no talking at all. So basically it's been, we get a spreadsheet, that is our data office gets a spreadsheet with about 120 different data points that they have to match by hand in order to ensure that there are no doubled ups, that there are no issues with that. That's taken one person in our office anywhere between 10 and 14 days. So we would never be able to meet that criteria to begin with. But imagine doing that for every student that's found, right? And we're talking about 850, 900 students. So that wasn't possible on our end to do. The other issue is that there has been a policy, I guess, right, that we can just mention because everybody, I'm sure, has heard about it. You actually probably all have it or have seen it in your governance documents in terms of data, and that is there was this underlying policy that the USB could not ask LEAs for data more than once. And if any of you have seen that before, it's in the guidance policy that was published in 2017. It's 8.1.3. I just recently looked, I memorized it. I recently looked though at Salt Lake School District's new one, which was just recently republished on their web and it's no longer there. And the reason that it's not is because it turns out it was just a policy that somebody had spoken verbally, but not something that we necessarily had to follow. So because of that policy though, what we were doing is we were saying, we can't upload the information when we find a student. We have to wait until the state gets all that information because we asked for that. So that's why we were doing it at the end of the year. Now that we've discovered that that really isn't an issue, then the policy and procedures that we will put into place and that we responded to back to the department is that we will have LEAs and their recruiters is what we call those who are working with migrant students. Once the student is found, they will input all that information within that 10-day period that is allotted, so it won't be an issue for us anymore. With that and all of the procedural documents and everything that I mentioned earlier, we will have cleared our deck in terms of those 8 findings by the 9th of November, of this coming November. So we won't have any issues after that. The only piece of that that will last a little bit longer, and it's just a few weeks more, is a data report that we have to send back to the department showing that we've corrected these errors and that we're actually collecting that data on a more consistent basis. And that will happen a few weeks after the November 9th date. The November 9th date is when we will meet with the migrant directors in the state to ensure that they're aware of the new policy and the new procedure. And from then on, it will be immediate that when they find a student, it will be automatically collected within those days. The other process that I can tell you that is going on because of this is that we're looking into creating board rule to ensure that the USBE has the support to be able to say to LEAs, this is a requirement for you, because currently there isn't for migrant. Any questions, Ryan? I'm happy to
I have
with
so
anybody
many
else.
questions, but I'll ask you.
So that's where we are.
Yes. So you said it's like, what, 850, 900 students? Is that the ballpark? Do you
That's
know?
right, yeah.
Okay, and so is this, I mean, if they're having to input that data on each student as they find them,
Yeah.
is that a heavy load for some districts? I'm trying to find out what the...
It's not necessarily. Our largest districts, well, Nebo is one of our largest districts as an example. and let me kind of highlight the issue. So because we don't have a board rule that says that that has to happen, LEAs have been waiting till the end of the year. So I can tell you, literally this year, just between us, Nebo School District, Nebo School District on the last day of August, August 31st, had 0 migrant students. On October 1st, which was the cutoff deadline to get all those in.
Magic day.
Yeah, we ended up having 289 students. From that. So it's a significant difference. And the issue becomes that we get specific funding based on those student numbers. So if those haven't been entered on time, then we're missing out on funding for districts to be able to provide services for kids. And that has been an issue. In fact, this year around, we ended up losing about $400,000 because of the data issues that we're going through. So this is a better way to expedite that, to ensure that that doesn't happen again, and at the same time to clarify any issues that may be happening.
Well, that's great.
Thanks, Jeff. So that concludes our meeting for today. Our next meeting will be Thursday, February 28th in the morning. Again, here at USBE in the same room. It will also be streamed live as we did this meeting. We will send out the minutes and the handouts that we have today. I think in June we presented you with a draft copy of our school improvement handbook. We have an edited version of that document now. We'll send that out as well, so you have a current copy of that as well. Anything else that that you'd like us to send, or any other information that you feel like would be helpful to you as part of this committee that we can provide?
Can I draw attention to? There's a few slides we didn't talk about the allowable uses of funds for school improvement, but I think they're quite readable, and there might be some information you'd like to read.
And we'll send out the actual PowerPoint. Right?
March 28th, you said?
February.
February 28th, pardon me. I note that at least on my calendar, the time is different than today. Is that correct?
Yes, it's in the morning. So I can.
All right. So
Yeah,
make
it's
sure.
10 to 12. It's on the bottom of your agenda.
Yeah, just want to make sure that we're consistent. Thank
And can I assure my superintendent that you're coming up to the pilot program is not because I'm on this committee?
Yeah, he will be asking that. No, it has nothing to do with you. It was a
Thank you.
random.
I can say that.
No, honestly, the group got together and they said, okay, what LEAs is Title I planning to visit? What LEAs is child nutrition doing? What is special ed? And those were the three that kind of lined up.
Nancy's on the committee, we're going to do about selling.
That's always the concern.
So if your superintendent asks, we'll say, oh, actually, no, she didn't even know about this until today. Thank you so much for being here. Your comments and your feedback and insights are just really incredibly valuable to us as staff here. It really helps us move forward and feel like, you know, we have some external input into the things that we're doing. So thank you so much. Thank you to
How are you?
Sorry.
Good. Is it crazy or great? Crazy. Oh no, we're fine too. Okay. So I wanted to ask about the new schools. Ochre. Ochre, Riverside, and Jessup. So, when I used to oversee the turnaround, there were some schools in turnaround that started doing ADT and homelessness. And so anyway,
the three principals from those schools were like, we're so interested in this APTT model because they found out through West Ed or something. And so attended meetings, and so they received funding, and it was going so well, and I lost connections with those principals because now Mandy's not the principal, Todd left. I think Rhonda's still there at Riverside. So I wanted to just like ask you, do you know if it's still going on in those three schools?
They're doing versions of it.
Okay.
So Oak Ridge, I think they're doing an APTT coming out right away. Well, so is Columbia. Columbia's doing it. Which officially they're not getting funding anyway, so they're doing their parent meeting like you would do for a regular APTT, but they're also going to do regular teaching conferences. Because I know Oker and Columbia got some complaints about. Well, Columbia wasn't one of the schools. I know, but they're doing it. Like a version. A version of it. But see, Oker's just doing a version of it too. Yeah. But they did the home visits, and they did the planning their meetings. I said that out loud. We just felt like they wanted a hybrid. Yeah, which is totally fine. I'm trying to so because I know the trainer for home visits, and none of those schools train for home visits, under the model that we use at least. But do you want to come out? We'll have a. Well, I feel like I can monitor that more. West Ed, right? We contracted or did the contract with them to do the schools. So once West Ed is gone, it's really up to a school to like keep it going, and there's no pressure from. And keep it going in the with the way the model is, or do a hybrid, whatever. I'm just trying to think of like in my role how I can support schools that want to continue it, even if their principal does leave, or for schools that want to try it. Like home visits, I've gotten down. Like their districts are like, hey, this, can you come to our next Title I meeting? There's just like an hour presentation on family engagement. Through that, different principals will call me and I'll retrain schools. That's kind of how that's been going. APTT's like in this like other world, and I can't figure it out, and I don't know how good it is. I don't think anyone right now is doing it straight.
Yeah, with like fidelity to that model. Yeah, I know. I don't. At least know it in our district. So how did Columbia get trained on it? Like just through help with Rhonda? With the principals. Okay. The principals just talked to me. And I don't know if she was really trained. She attended one of the very first meetings. Kathy, writing, is now a school adjuster. But she attended one of those very first meetings where they came and trained. West Ed, must have been West Ed, before they even, that was before they were invited, which eventually went to. Yeah, I think, that's when Kimberly from West Ed came to that like Title I meeting and just explained. I think so she got that much. She got funding Yeah, she's done versions of it. I'm trying to, what's the best way? I'm I want them to do it. Yeah, I'm kind of at a weird point between you and me, like,